Mad Mork, eh? Patrick, it's great to have you on my show. We got in touch. I don't know. I had to say it was well before COVID. We had our mutual INSEAD background, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. And the fact that we're both born in Belgium, who would have known crazinesses? And then we have our Yankophile side of ourselves, and then Hispanophone. So many things in common, Patrick. But I wanted to start off with asking you, Mad Mork, what is your relationship with Mad Mork, the man that is or was Mad Mork?
Yeah, so Mad Mork, the story behind that is, when I was at INSEAD, back in the days we used to have some wild and crazy pranks, as you may recall, always
I,
kind
I
of.
I think they've been slowly whittled out as inhumane or politically incorrect. But boy, oh boy, did they exist in my time.
They did, and mine as well, and mine as well. And so, before the age of social media kind of ruined everything, we did these pretty outrageous pranks for the new promotions arriving, and I was part of an association at the time for that welcome week called Itch, which was INSEAD Thinkers Against Consulting Hegemony,
Oh,
and
love it.
and so, it was all about, beating up consultants and consulting firms. And, the whole thing, of course, was a prank. But in my case, we took it to an extreme, which was quite dramatic. Is at the end of the welcome week, we had all the new MBAs in Amphi A, in the main Amphi. And there was a designated speaker who was pretending to be a partner of McKinsey. And of course, it was one of our classmates who was doing this. And he went on a long exposition, and he was dressed in a suit. And then a bunch of us from Itch were in the audience, all dressed in black, and we hadn't shaved in a week, and we were throwing things at this guy. And a long story short, we were heckling, and things got so out of control that this make-believe partner and I got into a heated confrontation. And the culmination of that confrontation, I got up from my seat, walked all the way down to the podium where he was, and unceremoniously dumped an entire pitcher of beer on his head, which of course was outrageous because people thought this was all real.
I mean,
And
presumably they were worried about waste of beer.
yeah, exactly. It was absolutely criminal. It was quite good too. And so, that's how I got the moniker Mad Mork, because people had been calling me that all week, and it culminated in this prank. And even though people after realized it was a prank, the name always stuck, and people have called me that for 20 years. So yeah.
And,
That's the relationship.
and do people still call you Mad Mork on occasion?
Yeah, quite a few of my close friends still do. Quite a few people in my class still do. But I laid the moniker to rest a few years ago, coming out of a coaching session with my coach. But I'd embraced it for a long time. As a matter of fact, and you may recall this from the book, but my email address when I was at Google as marketing director was madmork@google.com. And people, I remember the CMO at Google was shocked by that. She was like, "How can you work at Google and have a senior role and have this email address?" And I was like, "It's my brand. It's bigger than Google. This is." So for a long time, that was my address in every role that I held in technology companies and startups. It was Mad Mork at whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, and in your book you talk about how you were no longer being able to play at Google Play. It
Yeah,
was Google Play had become too serious for Mad Mork.
it had. It had. And that was one among many reasons that I left Google. And I think the idea of Mad Mork became a personal value for me. It became something that, I very strongly believe that for people to be happy doing what they're doing, it helps a lot when you are very clear on what your values are. And Mad Mork for me meant this idea of being autonomous, speaking my mind, constantly learning, being irreverent. And so when Google became too restrictive for me, that was a sign that it was time to probably move on and do something else.
Well, we're going to get into this idea of change and transformation, but I did want to cite a quote that was given by Claire Harbour, someone who we both know, former
Sure.
GM at LVMH and INSEAD grad. She said about your book, the sustained narrative of both your life and your career moved me to tears on several occasions. If this book does not inspire others to live better, be better, lead better, and just generally work harder on themselves, then nothing else will. You have created a treasure. So this is about your book, Step Back and Leap: 9 Keys to Unlock Your Life and Make Change Happen. What did the writing the book do for you?
Oof. That's almost a question for a therapy session.
Hmm.
You know, the book has a lot of very personal, very vulnerable, very painful moments to it. And I wanted it to not just be another self-help book. You know, there's so many self-help books, and especially in US culture, there's so much fluff and so much crap and so much repetition. And so, you know, the book for me was partially therapeutic. It came out of a coaching session in 2018 when I had just moved to Chile. And I was talking with my coach, and I have, you know, thousands of typewritten pages of journal entries going all the way back to, I think, 2005 and some of the first startups that I was ever in. And so there's thousands and thousands of pages of stories and insights and thoughts. And you know, my coach one day asked me in one of the sessions, she's like, well, you know, you've written all this stuff and you've thought about it and you've read a lot and taken webinars and now, you know, training to become a coach. And she's like, what might be possible if you decided to try to take all this stuff and condense it into, you know, something that's kind of, on the one hand, your life story, and on the other hand, you know, something that could be helpful for people. And so that's where it came from. So for me, it had the value of helping me sort through a lot of my past and make sense of some of the more unpleasant experiences, you know, some of the trauma. And then I think the other thing is, you know, you get to a stage in your career, Mentor. I think, you know, you've been there, we've all been there once you get enough gray hair, you know, where the money and the title and the responsibility ceases to be the driver, right? The driver becomes, you know, helping others, having an impact, making a difference, mentoring and coaching others. And so I knew that I could never coach as many people as I would love to coach. Because coaching as a profession is not very scalable. I don't have the hours in the day. And on top of that, you know, being the kind of coach that I am, I'm not exactly inexpensive. And so a lot of people just don't have access to coaches with this level of experience. So the next best thing was a book. You know, how can I reach a lot of people and really help them? And so, you know, that was the driver. That's kind of what I hope to get out of it. I never really thought about it as more than that. You know, now, of course, more things are happening with the book, and I'm developing a course on it. I'm going to develop a series of webinars and developing a lot of content, but that was the original goal.
I had on my podcast previously a lady psychologist and friend, Petra Velzebor, who wrote a book called Begin With You. And it is a harrowing story about her beginning of life in a cult that basically allowed the older men to do what they willed with the younger women. And I asked her this question and was like, well, how much of that is raw you? And let me reframe that question, which is, as much as we wish to do therapy, if you will, to what extent do we get down to the raw bones, the 100% truth? Because in the end of the day, let's say you're writing a book and the book is to be sold, so someone has to buy it.
Yeah.
And actually the rawest 100% true may not be effective in the storytelling.
Sure.
Secondly, it may be too raw or difficult to express. So
Yeah.
in that reframing, Patrick, how close to the bone do you feel you were, and do you feel good about that or not?
Yeah, the short answer to your question is I feel very, very good about it. It took me 3 years to write this book, and I wrote a large part of it during COVID. And I remember instances where, because I was running and trying to scale, my leadership development company Leap, I had to get up very early to write, and I would get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning so I could put in an hour and a half to write this book ahead of a full day of work, right? And running a bootstrap startup in a country that was literally falling to pieces, as people were rampaging out in the street and burning supermarkets, right? And you remember what Chile was like in 2019. It was a mess. And I remember days when I was, when you write a book like this, it's very painful because you relive all the things that happened to you. And I had days where I remember just, you know, losing it over the keyboard, at 5:30 in the morning, thinking back on being fired, messing up my career, messing up my marriage, a whole bunch of things, messing up, my life to some extent, right? And so I think the feedback I've gotten from some people, now the book is released in Spanish, and the feedback I've been getting, I had a teacher in northern Chile reach out on Instagram, and she was just blown away on the one hand and incredibly grateful that somebody would write something that raw. Because you don't see, people don't talk about this stuff, and I believe
Mhm.
we live in a world where people increasingly crave authenticity in a world that increasingly has less of it. Everybody's trying to behave and be something that they're not on social media, and everybody's taking selfies and creating videos, and everything's all wonderful and be your best self, and all that sounds great, but at the end of the day, we need to be in touch with our humanity. And so for me, I tried to be as real as I could. I've had some people reach out and say, like, wow, the scene where you talk about potentially going in and gunning down your teacher was too brutal, too open and raw, and you know why don't you even take into context what's happening in the United States on gun control? And my answer to this particular reader was, A, the US needs to get their shit together and realize they're in the 21st century and do something serious about gun control as a civilized nation, supposedly. And second, I speak in the book about a desire or a thought that crossed my mind. I don't speak about it from the point of view of the intent to do it. I don't do it. I don't encourage others to do it. Right. I speak from raw emotion of the anger that I felt at being bullied in this school when I was 10. So, I think it's pretty raw. I feel good about what I wrote. And I think the beautiful thing about this book, from what people tell me, is that anybody can read this book and relate to it. You don't have to be an INSEAD grad or be an MBA or be a billionaire or be some tech founder to read this book and be able to connect with the difficulties that I endured, right? All of us go through stuff like this. I'm not unique. I think what's unique is I choose to write about it in this way, and I choose to structure the book in a way that hopefully helps people. But that's the beauty of it, is so many people have read this and reached out and been like, oh my God, the scene where you talk about, your first night not being with your kids, or the scene where you talk about, mediation with your ex-wife and the
You
lawyers.
mean not meditation?
Yeah.
That was cute.
So yeah, people connect with it because everybody goes through tough times. We all do.
Yeah. Well, I think you may yet be unique, but the point here is that we don't have to be alone
Exactly.
in that unicity, because while this is my path, we all have challenges, and I suppose
Absolutely.
the real nuts and bolts of it is dealing with the challenges as opposed to hiding from them or blaming others for them. There's
Yeah.
one of the themes that I felt came out from your book is a notion of accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. Accountability is so underrated. I coach amazing people. I'm very blessed by my work. Like yesterday, I had like 4 or 5 coaching sessions. These are all top people, building very exciting companies, and dealing with stuff that will blow your mind, right? Everybody looks at entrepreneurship and technology and startups, and there's kind of this mythic aura around it. They don't realize how hard this is. They don't realize the sacrifice that you have to make and what you go through as a founder. And you know, they all have their struggles. There are always going to be things that are very difficult for us to do because we procrastinate, we avoid, we're scared, we have fears. Um, and so I put a lot of emphasis on the book on accountability because I've struggled with it my whole life. I continue to struggle with some things that I'm just like, oh my God, you know, when I have to do my taxes every year, it's like a Herculean endeavor, right? And there's other things that I don't like doing either. And so, you know, if we are not able to have accountability partners, if we don't do something to publicly manifest what we want out of our lives and get checks from people, then it's harder to succeed, right? I think you remember this. I think I spoke with you, you know, when we first met. I think I told you about the fact that I was writing this book, and I told a lot of people about this book when it wasn't even halfway done. And a big part of that was to force myself to finish. You know, it's a forcing function.
Well,
So when we're
yeah, by telling people, as you mentioned in the book, by telling people that you want to do something, it makes you accountable and you have a higher degree of potential success.
yes, you do. And I think the other thing that's cool about accountability is when you do it in that way, you also enlist people to become your fans, right? Is I think I fundamentally believe human nature is good, right? Others will argue differently. But I believe that, you know, when we share our intent to do something hard, then we give others the opportunity to help us and to cheer us on. And I think that is rewarding in and of itself. You know, when I told people I was going to do a century ride at 47 years old, half the people thought I was nuts. And then the other people were like, good for you, you know, get out and do it. And you know, when I completed it, and it was on Strava, and you know, it took me 8 grueling hours. You know, people were rooting for me and they thought it was cool, and they were like, awesome, you know, good for you, right? So, you know, I think we forget that when we ask for help, we give others the opportunity to feel good about helping us. It's not just about the help we get.
Yeah, that's so true. It's amazing how asking for help sounds like I'm weak.
Yeah, yeah. That is the society in which we live in generally. And it continues to shock me deeply. So many intelligent people will be like, oh, how can I possibly ask for help? Right? And my answer is, oh, how can you possibly not ask for help?
So the context in which you're living in Miami and working and coaching with founders in particular, or entrepreneurs, I suppose, but whoever is in need of your coaching services. We have a context that you're talking about where, you know, it's a society that doesn't allow for us to mention weakness or to cry for help or to show emotions for that matter still as men. But there's a book that I was reading called You and Your Profile by Hans-Jörg Müller and Paul D'Ambrosio. And one of the chapters is well, basically the book is suggesting that we're in a post-authentic society because
Yeah.
authenticity and transparency have now done their work, to say, and people have come around to believe that being 100% transparent isn't desirable. Being 100% authentic is unrealistic, and so we create what they call prophilicity, where we create a series of profiles of who we are. And in this context, you know, the idea of being one true self with a strong purpose, your values, as you've described, and certainly something that I believed in, is maybe confronted by another reality where maybe we should allow ourselves to be different people. The idea of well, you can have the pathology of having split personalities or multiple personality disorders and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you get up and you're naked and you're in the shower, and then afterwards you're with your daughter at breakfast, and that's a different kind of profile. So my point is, then you're the individual that dons some sort of corporate or work outfit. You have a background in your image, and you
Yeah.
show a certain profile that's not as authentic as the exact background you might have, and or whatever. And so we go through life with a number of personas and masks. And I'm wondering to what extent a work on the self can integrate these multiple personalities, because that feels like an excuse at some level not to be yourself.
Yeah, I look, I think there's a lot of truth to what you just said. I think you can't also go from one extreme to another. I think if we were brutally honest and authentic all the time, we would end up probably saying things that would get us into trouble and hurt and wound others as well, right? I mean,
For example,
yeah, there has to be a degree of kind of civility, to the way we lead our lives. And I think you raise a very interesting point, which is people do have different personalities. People do behave differently depending on the people that they're around, and it's very interesting that we be okay with that. For example, when I'm with my kids, I'm much more laid back. I make a lot of jokes. I'm even more irreverent. I'm kind of goofy. I don't really behave like that when I'm in a business setting, obviously. I certainly don't behave like that with clients. I mean, I tend to be more lighthearted, and I tend to be an easygoing kind of guy. But definitely the profile of me that my kids see is different, right? They see the father, they see the funny guy, but they also see the strict guy. They see the parent, the coach. And then, when I'm with my friends on weekends, I am and have been, and I don't really talk about this in the book, but I have been and am a very big fan of, EDM, electronic dance music, have been for decades. And, even though I'm pushing 52 years old, I will go out clubbing on a weekend. I'll go to a club and see, one of my favorite DJs and go dancing and enjoy the music. And I'll be surrounded by people who are, half my age or in their 30s. And I'm having a good time, and that's fine. And that's a different profile, and that's okay. And that's me being me. So I think, people just should focus more on being themselves, and you will have a different self depending on your context and your surroundings and the people that you're with. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally, but that's just me.
well, and I think it's an interesting dilemma, because at the same time we're trying to, with that first degree of knowledge of self, understand ourselves.
Yeah,
And if it's all super messy, like some sort of hieroglyphic, because there's a bit of me at the dance, there's a bit of me with my children, there's a bit of me with this and that. I mean, it can become a scattered version, and
sure.
hard to stay in touch with the backbone of what you
Yes,
actually are.
that's true. I think that's a fair point. I think you can get lost a little bit, and I think there's another problem, which is particularly for younger people, is we're going through a phase now with everything that's happening in society, all these job changes, all these societal changes, what COVID did, working from home, and now, of course, artificial intelligence, where many of us are starting to seriously think, well, is my job going to be around in 3 to 5 years? Is there going to be that work? Is that work going to exist for me, right? Or what am I going to have to do? Who am I going to have to become? And so for younger people, I think it's even more difficult because I think we're being taught that career cycles are becoming shorter. You're going to have to A/B test and try your way through different careers to figure out what sticks. And then as soon as you figure out something that sticks, 5 years later, it's going to change. You're going to have to start all over again. And that was also why I believe that change is like a muscle, and it requires training. You have to be good at mastering the art of change. It's like going to the gym. If I don't go to the gym for a week, I'm sore the week after, right? I can't maintain my strength. I can certainly not become stronger. And that was a little bit my goal with the book and a lot of the public speaking that I do is I'm telling people, guys, you need to embrace the art of being able to adapt to change and becoming good at changing. Because otherwise your life is going to become very, very challenging, much more challenging than it is now. Right. So all these things kind of go hand in hand.
Well, you certainly have the word change in your subtitle. And at the beginning of one of your chapters, I picked it up because I really enjoyed it. And this is where I want to continue our conversation. It's a
Sure.
quote from Stephen Covey. People can't live with change if there's not a changeless core inside them. The key to the ability to change is a changeless sense of who you are, what you are about, and what you value. And and the other day I wrote an article about how one of my mantras has been change is for sure, growth is the option.
Yes.
And what Covey talks about here is this changeless core. Yet there's another thing which I think is interesting is in a world where everything changes, is it okay to stay the same in anything? As in, does everything have to be up for grabs? These new sentences which have hold your ideas lightly because having convictions is dangerous.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that because I think that if you look at the state of the world, right? And certainly if you look at, what's happening in the Middle East, right? If you look at what's happening in Ukraine, um, I think a large part of the reason why these things are happening is that we lack leaders who have conviction. I think we have a crisis of leadership in the world. And that's why we find ourselves mired in situations that are solvable, but we don't have enough people who are true to their convictions, who are standing up and raising their hand and saying, you know what, this is not okay. We can do better than this, right? And so I think certain things shouldn't change. I mean, when we talk about, when I go in and I work with, entrepreneurs or business leaders, and we talk about either their career, because I do a lot of career coaching, or we talk about their organizations, one thing is at that core that shouldn't change, and that is essentially your purpose as a human being, the reason why you believe you're on this earth, and your values as a person. And I talk about that a lot in the book. And so I think whether you're an organization or whether you're a human being, when you have a deep sense of what your purpose and your values are, and you decide that you are going to live your life or run your business based on those convictions, based on that purpose, and based on those values, first of all, your life becomes simpler. Your decisions in your business become easier to make because you automatically rule out a bunch of things because they don't fit with your purpose or they don't fit with your values. The same is true in business. I mean, when Google pulled out of China back in 2012, they did so out of a deep conviction that it's wrong to censor search results in the world that we want to live in. That is not the kind of world that we want to live in. We want to live in a world where people have open and unlimited access to information. Even if it's information that we disagree with, even if it's thoughts and beliefs we disagree with, information should be accessible and useful to everyone. That has been Google's philosophy and the reason for being for a very long time. And so they have stayed true to that conviction. So certain things I think we need to make sure we don't change because that's the core of who we are as people. For me, I have my four core values and I have my purpose, which is, to inspire others to lead careers of meaning and purpose. That's the essence of who I am. So if I lose that essence, then who am I really? I'm just another, voice drowning in the dark on Instagram.
I might want to get back to that, and I certainly want to get back to the leadership crisis. But something that is a frequent question in my mind and in the work that I do is at what point do you do this transition from the rat race, the job, then the fed upness with working for the big title and the big paycheck to,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this doesn't do it right for me. Crisis. of identity, perhaps, or midlife crisis, or early midlife, or whatever it is, and all of a sudden, or near death experience, you say, "Ah, I want to do something bigger, better than this. I need to have purpose." And so I, like you, came across this idea later in life, having done the corporate shtick and a serious corporate career. Is it desirable? Is it possible to start off with this? Is that something that kids out of high school should be thinking about, or do you kind of need to go through the gerbil in the cage moment before you feel like liberty is outside of the cage?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I think part of the cop-out answer, unfortunately, is that I think it does vary significantly from person to person. You have some people that are far more mature about this way of thinking than others. You have some people who never mature. They just, like, they're 60, they're 70, they still think with a fixed mindset, that career and money and power and prestige and wealth is what the world is all about. And I don't judge those people. That's their call. I don't think that that is the kind of life that ultimately gives you a whole lot of meaning and happiness and fulfillment. And I would question what goes through that person's mind when they're lying in their hospital bed at 80 and the lights are about to go out, right? How do they actually feel about what they've achieved? But I look at my son, for example, and he has a maturity at his age at 17, which I would struggle to find in somebody who's even 30 or 35 years old, right? I can't understand exactly why. I think from a spiritual point of view, when we've talked to experts and stuff, my ex-wife and I, they have told us that he's what's called an old soul, right? Which is somebody who has been reincarnated multiple times. And so their behavior and their way of thinking and looking at the world is very different from somebody who's physically 17 years old, right? So he has a maturity which most kids his age do not have, and he sees the world in a different way, and we have different conversations. And so I would say that in a situation with somebody who has that level of maturity, then this concept of starting to think about your purpose and your values may make more sense earlier. But for many people, it don't. It doesn't. For many people, they have to live through, they have to slog through the stuff that you and I slog through, because it's only through that experience and through experiencing those stories that they will start to realize that the mountain that they've been climbing up was actually the wrong mountain. But unfortunately, you need to make the climb. You make the climb and you bust your ass and you get up there and you look at the top of the mountain. And some people get up there and they feel great. And a lot of people get up there and they go, cool. I look across the valley and I realize there's a better mountain over there and I climbed the wrong freaking mountain. And then you start all over again, which is what I did 6 years ago. And I'm climbing, right? So I do think it varies a lot from person to person. But I think one of the things that maybe we fail to do in the educational system is I don't think we do a good enough job of really helping young people understand their values, understand what the world needs, understand what they're really good at, understand what they're really excited about, and bring those things together in a career that will be more fulfilling to them. I think too many young people still fall into something the same way you and I fell into something. I mean, I became a marketing guy at Pepsi because my dad had been a marketing guy at Pepsi. That was not preordained. That was not my life's aspiration, was not to sell freaking, flavored sugar water. God knows if you know what's in that stuff, you should know not to drink it, right? But I fell into it because that's what I saw around me, and because I didn't really think for myself and I didn't have enough knowledge of myself to know that, hey, you know what? I might actually be a really good university teacher. I might be a really good coach. I might actually be a good, athletic coach. I might have been a good athlete. I might have been a good comedian. I might have been a great actor. I didn't know because I didn't spend enough time getting to know myself. And that's, I think, there's an enormous opportunity as a society for us to do much better there.
So I feel like pushing back, or at least pushing into two of these points. You talked about maturity or the immaturity of the 60-year-old banker wanker who he's worried about his fourth house and his
Yeah.
third wife and these other things, and what is he going to bring to his grave. Well, as if that's immature. I would argue at some level that that is an overly mature thought where they forgot their childhood, where they
Mhm.
forgot their immaturity,
Yeah,
and forgot what actually is pure play and a naivete that makes life so much more interesting somehow. And these same people are also now curiously looking for immortality drugs and anti-aging, type of medications and things are getting rid of this illness that's called age.
yeah,
And then on the other side, I wonder about the young kid who has the maturity to know what he or she wants, and how it's difficult to really know how to deal with all the hardships and whatever it's going to take to do that. You have some who start off saying, "Well, I want to be an artist," and they live
mhm,
as a struggling artist, and one could call them completely immature because they never
mhm.
grew up, if you will. They
Sure.
think that being an artist and living that dream, my passion is to paint, and and live off of tidbits and stale bread. So that could be considered immaturity by
Sure.
another level. So
Absolutely.
and then the final piece I want you to riff on, you can pick whatever bone you want to take on this one, which is that the idea that I can be whoever I want to be is lovely in theory,
Yeah.
but what the heck do you know at the age of 16? And even at 28, certainly you're still forming yourself. You haven't actually seen everything,
Yeah.
and life is going to throw you a whole bunch of other difficulties. So the idea of introducing hardship, like you just got to go and do the rabbit race,
Yeah.
and you have to do your shit, and you have to
Yeah.
work as an intern at Pepsi and sell some flagrantly cancerous water. But that's what you have to do. Get over it, stiff upper lip, and move on. And then you learn more about yourself in those moments, those dour moments, limitations that exist in life, and putting up with shit. So I
Yeah.
was wondering how you want to riff on that.
Look, I think you raised some very valid points, right? I think definitely when you think of the maturity question, you're right from the point of view that, as we get older and we become mature, the problem is that we lose that wondrous sense of curiosity, right? We stop growing, we stop innovating. One of the biggest criticisms I have of our society today is that we watch the world of sports and we see people like Tiger Woods or Federer or Nadal or any of these amazing athletes, and they all have coaches. And they don't have all have coaches because they necessarily have to fix something. They all have coaches because they know that that's the only way to continue to improve. And that's the only way that you get an outsider who has the perspective to see where you can improve. And yet, in many parts of society, we do not have coaches. Our politicians, God forbid, are the ones who sorely need coaching because they can't lead, right? Our business people, it's all over the map, but you see so many dysfunctional companies with people who have no idea how to lead and people who have no inclination to grow, right? So you have a lot of that. And so I think that's part of the problem is you grow up, you get set in your ways, you get set in your routines and your habits. Human beings are creatures of habit, and we don't make an effort to continuously grow and stretch and develop ourselves, right? And so I think that is a big problem, is to lose that sense of immaturity. As you said, I think ideally, we should have the maturity based on wisdom and experience that we have, and the immaturity of letting our hair down and doing stupid shit and trying things that are completely outside of our comfort zone and doing things that are a little bit nuts once in a while. That's where the joie de vivre comes from a little bit,
Mm.
right? So there's definitely some of that. Um, in terms of your comment on, how early in life should people be thinking about purpose and values? Again, that's a fair point because you do have to get out and just do things and earn a living and work. And ultimately, the only way that you really learn is through the school of hard knocks. You go out and you do things, and oftentimes it doesn't work out. So I'm not necessarily advocating that a 16-year-old should be all hung up about their purpose and their values at 16. However, I would say two things. I would say that, first of all, if you have a better notion of your values, then even when you're starting your career, it will eliminate certain things that you don't want to do, that you shouldn't do, because it goes against your values, right? So my son, I can tell that one of his values is fitness and sports. That is a huge part of his life. He's good at it. It's healthy for him. It gives him a sense of competition, of camaraderie. It's good to make him into a better leader, and it's part of his identity. So I would never tell him, and I would seriously question him if he told me, I want to go into investment banking. I wanted to go into consulting, because you have no life in those jobs. And because the chances that you will have a good enough balance doing that kind of work with the hours that it entails, the chances are very high that you're not going to be able to engage in your passion for sports, right? So having that degree of self-awareness, I think, can help young people avoid pretty basic mistakes, right? That many of them make simply because they don't have enough self-awareness of what really matters to them, what's really core to them. Right? It's like somebody saying, you know, I'm gonna become I'm gonna go down one career because I want to make a lot of money, but yet it goes against so many things that are core to them that they lose themselves in this quest for making more money. And I would also argue that I think, even though you don't necessarily have to go down the rabbit hole of going and identifying your purpose when you're 21 or 22, I do think that kind of like helping young people get a better understanding of their strengths and their weaknesses. We used to call it, the Gallup Strengths Finder, right? The assessment that you go through and you figure out what you're really good at. If you really have a very deep knowledge of that, it will also help you make smarter choices in your career. For example, with my son, I had him do a personality assessment. I had him do one of these Myers-Briggs kind of assessment. And he was fascinated by the results as he read through it. And I'll never forget, one of his comments to me was, wow, Dad, you really understand me much better than I understand myself. Because he was reading through the assessments, and all the things the assessments was done was things that I've been telling him for years. Right? And so when young people have more of that self-awareness, which typically only comes from maturity experience in the school of hard knocks, they get an extra edge that hopefully will help them avoid some of the mistakes we made because we didn't have that.
The little story in my head here, Patrick, is the idea of association and disassociation from parent,
Yeah,
because it's unlikely that a 16-year-old is going to have their own values made from their own self. These are going to be values that, generally speaking, generalizations being what they are, will have
yeah,
come from the upbringing of their parents. And so then there's this sort of rebellion mode, and then eventually, in a sort of a Pavlovian manner, you come back to some of these old-fashioned values. I wanted to just spend a little bit of time before we break on this notion of crisis of leadership. The image in my mind is of Sanna Marin, the Finnish prime minister, dancing. So a little bit your EMD, Patrick, right? And yet prime minister of a country. And you mentioned politicians that, generally speaking, are missing conviction. You also mentioned the Middle East, and I feel the challenge that we have as being role models and leaders is knowing how to stand up for things which aren't popular.
exactly.
And today, when we say being a better leader or doing good, by which benchmark do we mean better, and what do we mean by good?
It's a great question. I mean, I think, there's some degree of subjectivity in that, right? But I think, I think there's a notion sometimes in our society that, leaders have to be liked, right? And that they have to be popular. But if you look throughout history, some of the greatest leaders were anything but that during various parts of their tenure, either as business leaders or as politicians. I mean, some of the things that, Churchill did during the Second World War were certainly not popular. They were things that had to be done. Some of the things that, some of our presidents do certainly are not necessarily popular. They have to be done. When you have to lay off employees in your startup or in your company, that's not something that's popular. It has to be done. When you tell people they have to go the extra mile and deliver the product in 2 weeks instead of in 4 weeks, that's not popular. It has to be done. So, I think that is a little bit, I think part of the challenge that we have in society today is I think we have two problems. Is I think first, we have a massive lack of psychological safety. People are afraid of raising their hands and making suggestions, speaking their mind, bringing bad news, saying something that is controversial and that is not mainstream. And you see this across many university campuses in the United States. There is an association, run by a professor at Stanford called FIRE, which they're a nonprofit that does a survey every year of the level of free speech across the United States, across all major universities. And guess what? One of the universities with the worst record and the worst rating in free speech is Harvard, where it's a Harvard professor who coined the term psychological safety and wrote the book on this back in early 2000. Right? So what does that tell us? If one of the bastions of education in the United States, people are afraid to speak their mind, right? On topics, whether it's the Middle East or whether it's abortion or whether it's other things, right? So to me, those kind of things are a problem, and leaders are required there to step up and to say, this is not okay. We cannot have a university with this level of prestige. We can't have that in any university. If you think of what universities are supposed to do for young people, we can't have an environment where we can't have open conversations, even if it's about difficult things, and even if it's inviting people who have very controversial opinions. We can't resolve any problems if we're not willing to have a discussion.
Amy Edmondson is the professor you're referring to.
Yeah.
And she's done some remarkable things, especially in the medical area. But this idea of psychological safety is always a curious one for me, because I tend to associate it with, you can't say words that are going to trigger me, as opposed to the safety to say what's really on my mind. Yeah. So you mentioned civility at the beginning. That's one area, the how you say things counts, but it shouldn't crimp me from not being able to express my opinion. And typically, I think that psychological safety is usually attributed to protecting people from being hurt, as opposed to allowing somebody to say what they want to say.
True. That's true. I think that is true. And unfortunately, I think, sometimes we worry too much about, whether we're going to hurt somebody's feelings, right? Because difficult conversations mean that somebody's going to get hurt, right? I think when I talk to business leaders today, one of the biggest challenges that business leaders face is giving feedback to young people. It's like, oh my God, if I have to tell this person that their report was really not good, and I have to explain to them why, they're going to be crushed. Their self-confidence is going to be crushed. And then what happens? Right? And then they're on social media crying about why they got negative feedback, when in reality, the purpose of the feedback is to help you improve. People don't get better without feedback, right? But now we live in a society where, people are too scared to give feedback, and other people, don't want to give feedback. They don't want to give negative feedback because they're not going to be liked, right? Because this is
or they're going to get called out, Patrick, for being a white male racist or something, other ist of some sort.
I mean, I got that, right? I was told in one of the companies that I worked with in Silicon Valley, I was told by the general counsel, who was a divorced guy, a couple years older than me, white male. And he told me, if you say certain things in a certain context and it goes to trial, you will be guilty. The company is guilty before you even sit down at the table, because you are white, single, male, 47, European ancestry. You're done. And that's a horrible thing to hear something like that. And it's a horrible thing to know that you can't manage effectively and you can't help people develop because you have to toe some bullshit line. I mean, it's like for me, that was a big part of the reason why I got out of the rat race and I became a coach because I was like, you know what? I don't need to deal with this crap anymore.
And yet, a lot of people do, and will need
Yeah.
your services. A last question for you, Patrick. And it's something that, if anyone reads your book, Step Back and Leap, your dedication of the book is to your parents. I hope they are well. And to your ex-wife. Now, I don't know how many people have ever dedicated a book to an ex-wife. So this Laura that features prominently in the book, I was wondering how she experienced reading the book to the extent that she did.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that question because I have gotten comments from people who are always surprised that as an ex-husband, I their perception is that I treat her as graciously as I try to treat her in the book, and generally in any comments that I make about her. We have a very, very good relationship. I speak with her nearly every day about one thing or other related to the kids or other things. I think being a better version of yourself requires a tremendous amount of self-awareness, and it requires the effort to look deeply inside ourselves and take stock of who we are and what we've done, right? And that's a big reason why I called the book Step Back and Leap as opposed to just leap or something. I think transformation and change requires us to step back and look inside, and sometimes we will not like what we see. And I think, part of the reason I dedicated the book to her was because, the marriage falling apart, there's always two sides to the story, but I have to bear the brunt of why it happened. Most of it's on me. Um, I dedicated it to her because I think that despite everything, she continued to treat me very, very well. I think she was always fair. She was always a good person to me. She, took amazing care of our children, right? And raised them as a single mother and as an entrepreneur in a foreign country, which is not easy. And we've continued to be on very good terms. And, so we have a relationship that most people who are divorced look at that and they're like, how is that even possible, right? That you guys have that level, not just of civility, but degrees of friendship and understanding. So, I think I owe her a lot for that. And more than anything, I think, the other reason why I think it's important to acknowledge her role in the book is if she hadn't left me, I probably would not have written the book. A lot of things that happened to me wouldn't have happened. And so that's also central thesis of the book is growth is painful. And you have to look at certain experiences like failed marriages. You can't just look at them as failures. You have to look at them as part of the journey to becoming a better human being. And Laura helped me become a better human being. And for that, I will be eternally grateful.
And clearly, your coaches, the one from INSEAD, I can't remember his name, and the other lady, obviously helped you as well in taking that step back. Patrick, or Mad Mork, great to have you. There was a couple other chapters I really enjoyed, would recommend people reading, but specifically the chapters that I wanted to pull out were about asking powerful questions and managing your energy, both of which are deeply necessary in our society. Patrick, how can anybody get in contact with you, hire you as a coach? Should they wish? Hopefully, they're living in Miami, but whatever. Get your book. What are the best ways? What are the connections we can send them to?
Definitely. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Patrick Mork Official. That's the best way to find me on LinkedIn. I publish a lot of content on LinkedIn. I'm also very active on Instagram. But most of my content on Instagram is in Spanish. It's for a Spanish speaking audience. So that's not as obvious, but it's also Patrick Mork Official. And then, there's my website, patrickmork.com, that talks a lot about the book, my past, who I am, what I do, both in terms of leadership development and career transition coaching. So yeah, either one of those three works. I am on X, don't use it a lot, never use Facebook, and I'm not on TikTok yet. So
it might be the big irony that it will become an X. Um, with that, Patrick, muchas gracias.
Yeah.
Fue un placer. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Gracias a ti, Mentor. Fue un placer igualmente. Un gusto.